Good morning and welcome to Japanese Politics 101. Today is May 9th, and Timothy Langley, CEO and Representative Director of Langley Esquire, will walk us through the latest developments in the Japanese politics. Get your coffee and enjoy the conversation.
Feels like it's been a long time since we got together, even though this is a weekly room on what's going on in Japanese politics that's important to you. But let me get right to it. I've got about six packages I want to talk about, and after each of them, then we'll open the room. It does tend to extend the time. We usually go over an hour when we do it this way, but I think it's better when we get better content and better audience interaction. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to come up and maybe pose a question or something while I'm talking, go ahead and raise your hand, and Maya will let you into the room. So, well, the schedule that I have today, Maya already told you about, it follows too closely what we talked about last week because these issues, they just stay on the front burner. There are a lot of other issues, but these are the kind of issues that are most important to diplomats, to people that live in Japan, that are running businesses, and that are just a topical concern. So, given the limitation of time, let me get these right out of the part initially. So, first of all, COVID. We've seen that Tara, who is the czar for vaccine administration, has come up very strongly this week and talked about setting up these vaccine centers that will be administered by, he says it over and over again to emphasize it, the self-defense forces. So the Prime Minister authorized the Minister of Defense to participate in this and to set up the facilitations of administration under the self-defense forces. This is in addition to what the various municipalities are doing too. So they're securing convention centers, big sites where people can come in. But even in light of that, they've also announced that, probably even at full speed, each of these centers, and there are initially going to be 3 of them, but I think that they will roll out very quickly, can handle about 2,000 people a day. That sounds very low to me, but they're pushing forward on that, and it will probably increase exponentially, we would hope. The other thing that came out, I think that you might have seen, is that it was released probably as a leak or maybe just as an expose, that Japan is receiving 40% of all vaccine out of Europe. And with the stockpiling that's going on in Japan, people are wondering how come it's not being distributed. So there are bottlenecks that they're trying to address. The government was explaining that we're not getting the supplies. And so this story that came out just this week kind of turns that into a lie. That the vaccines are arriving, they're just being stuck because of bottlenecks. And those bottlenecks are, just as we discussed last week, the injectors and the doctors surrounded by 4 nurses, and the nurses can administer the shots. But also in the municipalities throughout Japan, that they're just not set up for informing the people who are 65 years and older how to get the shot, how to sign up for it, how to register for it. And there's bottlenecks there, but I think they're starting to come around. But the level of frustration among the Japanese population is beginning to take home form. And this is bad because of, for a lot of things, for the elections that are coming up for ministers for members of the lower house, but also for those who are hoping to become prime minister. Something that there are other things going on with the vaccines. I think, given that the authority is given to the self-defense forces for administration, that means that medics will be administering the shots too. So maybe this is a tiny sleight of hand. It seems to me that would be very expeditious, but it's we just have to wait to see that. So with that, let me close that up so that we can get to questions and concerns about that, and then move on to the other ones. Any questions or comments? Okay, let's move on. My next topic is China and what's going on with China and Japan. You know that the Prime Minister visited with the President of the United States 2 weeks ago. They talked about a lot of things with regard to China and the 2+2 against China's encroachment, the supply chain, the chip production, moving essential production out of China and giving subsidies for those Japanese companies who might be in China to relocate to other places in Southeast Asia, or maybe even better yet, to come back to Japan and do their production here in this country. A lot of problems too. The main one being just how are they going to get workers to achieve that? On the other side, Japan is in a trilateral mission with China, Japan, and Korea on how to make things nicer and how to keep things calm. So there are a lot of things going on a bilateral area that doesn't include the United States. So Japan has acknowledged, that China is one of its most important trading partners. I mean, that's obvious, although we lose sight of that when we get into these little fights and our conversations are dominated by the fact that China is growing and encroaching on, the sea lanes and the uninhabited inlets, building, artificial islands. So it does look like there is a slow creep going on with the Chinese, but at the same time, the Japanese, some things are just inevitable if China is going to do that. They are so large and have so much power. The United States produced the 2021 diplomatic yearbook. It's a kind of compendium of what's going on diplomatically. It was just produced or released last week, and China became a main feature there. So it kind of discusses what are the main issues and what is the general drift of diplomacy. And although they spent a lot of time on Quad, on the U.S.-Japan relationship, they stepped a little bit away from mentioning too much about Taiwan. And this is important because how things are evaluated and weighed are always telegraphed beforehand. And Taiwan falling off the main burner is somewhat troubling, especially with what's going on in Hong Kong, and also with the Chinese. We reported earlier on, maybe 3 weeks ago, that the Chinese had revised their maritime law so that Coast Guard vessels could fire on foreign vessels, which they perceived or interpreted as encroaching or violating security. And they've just revised another law. It will go into effect in September. It falls under the traffic safety law, interestingly enough, but it allows the Chinese Coast Guard even more power to approach and defend what China perceives as its sovereign territory. So in September, when this law goes into effect, it's only a couple months away. You will notice that there is rising tension in the South Pacific region. So this is just teeing it up for you. The law will be passed in the Chinese legislature, I think this week. But it is not a good sign for what's going to be happening in the near future. Similarly, in North Korea, the North Koreans have been watching the Biden administration and announced this week that they have noticed very hostile intentions coming out of the Biden administration because of a comment that was made on human rights. So you only need to say something a little bit quickly, and the North Koreans really go ballistic on that. No pun intended. So you can anticipate that under the Trump administration, things were pretty quiet. There were no test flights. There were no launches. There were very few. And things seemed to be quiet. Trump visited North Korea. The Biden administration is distancing itself from anything that the Trump administration did. And that's being watched carefully by the North Koreans. And they have decided now that the Biden administration is hostile to North Korean interests. So they're going to rattle the saber just a little bit. You can expect something happening probably in the next 3 weeks, I would anticipate, unless there's a little bit more of a show of conciliation. Knows how that's going to go. What else is there about China? Joint exercises with the United States is ongoing. That has ramped up. It has been somewhat ongoing as just a natural course of events. But since Biden and Suga met, it has increased, and there's more cooperation and more joint exercises. The only problem with that is that when they're ramped up in a tense situation, sometimes mistakes are made, sometimes signals are crossed, and in this environment, things can be misinterpreted. So rather than providing a larger blanket of security, even though these are exercises meant to train the forces in cooperation and sequencing their activities, it does open the door for risk, and the coordination between the United States Navy and the Japan South Maritime Forces has never been very cohesive. So there's a little bit of concern to be watchful for there. So over the summer, I think there's going to be a lot that could be coming up concern. We just need to keep our eye on that. With that, I'd like to close up China and open it to the questions, and then we'll go on to the digital agency. Great. The digital agency. We've talked about this ever since we were in this room. It is the flagship achievement of Mr. Suga. It was his idea. He was Minister of Telecommunications before he was tapped as the Chief Cabinet Secretary by Mr. Abe to become the longest serving Chief Cabinet Secretary in Japanese political history. And from there, he leapt into the Prime Minister's role. And so he does, he relies on what he is got the best background and expertise in telecommunications. First, right off the bat, he insisted that the telephone carriers reduced the prices so everybody would fall in love with the new Prime Minister. He was successful with that. And the second thing that he did was come up with this idea of forming a digital agency. That has been largely successful. The 6 laws that comprise the entire package of the digital agency went through the lower house very quickly, and has been in the upper house for the last 3 weeks. And it was expected to go through there very quickly and become law. But it got stuck there. And the reason why it got stuck is because the upper house, unlike the lower house, the upper house found errors in spelling and in syntax of the language of the 6 bills. So the irony here is that what they have done is they've taken those bills, they've printed them out, and they're going through them by hand for the digital agency. You can appreciate it. So that is taking time. These 6 bills consist of thousands of pages, and so they're going through that much more carefully, and they're trying to correct these misspellings, and it's the selection of kanji, or maybe a misspelled kanji, and correct all of those before it goes into law. So it's a very tedious process. I don't think that This is because they wanted the law to be a squeaky, perfect in the lexicon of Japanese language. The reason why they did that was to prevent the bill from becoming law, thus robbing the Prime Minister the ability to call an election for a snap election. They bought 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks by doing that. And what has happened is the window of opportunity for him to call a snap election has evaporated, and there is no opportunity for him now until after the Olympics. So whatever that tactic was, however that tactic was conjured or noted for the opposition, it has been successful. So they can relax, they can have the Tokyo elections and shore up their defenses and their election coffers so that they have a stronger chance of beating the LDP when the election is finally called. This is bleeding into a little bit of what I want to talk about later. I'd like to keep that separate, what the SIGA standing is. But the digital laws now are slated to be passed through the upper house since that objective has already been met sometime this month. Today is the 9th, so we can anticipate sometime mid-month those bills being announced as passing the diet. And then, according to my information, the agency is supposed to be launched in September, but I think because it ran through this 2 or 3 week delay, it might push back into October. And the interesting part about that is that the election for the lower house must occur constitutionally by October 21st. It can occur earlier if there's a vote of no confidence or if the Prime Minister decides he's going to hold a snap election. And you also have in October the LDP election for Prime Minister. So that's an interesting thing that's coming up. A lot of going on there. I hope it's not confusing to you. But before we end this conversation, I hope it all makes sense. So with that, I'd like to close up the conversation on the digital laws. We'll go to the Olympics after that, but let me open the room for any questions. Thank you. You're great. So this, in doing it this way, we preserve as much time towards the tail end for questions, answers, and comments about other things that might be important to you that I'll completely missed. So on the Olympics, it feels like we haven't talked as a group more than several weeks. It was only a week ago that we talked. There was still some concern about spectators joining, not joining, the Olympics being held, not being held. And just in the span of a week, there has been so much activity and so much consternation. So the president of the Olympic Worldwide Global Committee, he wanted to come to Japan, and gosh, he's told it's going to be awful tough to get you into Japan. If you want to come to Japan to review what we're doing, we're kind of busy. I don't know if you followed that, but his invitation to come visit Japan was rejected by the commissioner of the Olympics here in Japan, Shimoto. And that came out just 2 days ago. Pretty sure. There are lots of reasons for it, you and your delegation were tied up with other things, but on the surface, it just looks awful strange. And if you were watching the news, the chief, his position, I can't recall, but dealing with potential disaster simulations within the Olympic Committee, announced that the Olympics should occur in Japan because Japan has done a very good job of preparing for potential outbreaks, and they've vaccinated the Olympians, and they're potentially thinking of no spectators. He's not going to say anything about that or the other. It's the Japanese prerogative, but he said that the Japanese Olympics will go on very strongly. And that was followed up just the next day by stating that they endorsed the Olympics being held in Japan. There's a lot of pressure internationally putting on the Japanese to hold the Olympics. And you've heard Suga say in the past, I would like to consider what our options are, but we have to deal with the Olympic Committee on what our decisions are. And you might question that. You might think of different scenarios that appear to be conspiracy theories, but in fact, the Olympic Committee does have an awful lot of power over how Japan is doing things. You might remember that they moved one of the Olympic events to Hokkaido just unilaterally early in the process, and it upset people, but they've got plenty of power. It's not just Tokyo, it's not just the central government. It is also the Olympic Committee as well. So there's a lot of information that is going on, but the long and short of it is that it does appear we're less than 3 months away, that the Olympics will occur, that the athletes, there's more than 15,000 athletes for the Olympics and Paralympics that will be coming in. The guarantee of they're being vaccinated before they get here, or if they're not vaccinated, evidence that they are free of COVID, and they're, it's so daunting. There are 80,000 Japanese volunteers, and they interact with the Olympians as they come in at some level, and they live in the economy. So these aren't full-timers. They're 80,000 Japanese nationals who are helping either in translations or gates or just a lot of different things. And when they finish their volunteer work, they go home and get into the regular stream of society. So it is possible that something could happen. And also the Olympians themselves, when they come here to Japan, they do their event. They probably come 2 weeks beforehand. They get acclimated, they train, they get ready for their event. They finish their event, and now they're free, and they're going to be one. And they're not restricted from visiting Roppongi or other places in Japan. So there's that worry too. They do have apps where they have to tell people where they are, how they're going there. They can't use public transportation, and there are certain restrictions. But it is something of some concern. If you're in the government of Japan, you would be very concerned about this too and how you manage it. So there's a lot going on in the background, but I think that let me move on, open the room for questions. And with that, we'll move on to Mr. Suga's standing. So any questions, any comment?
If you allow me to chime in. Well, actually, in the news this week, there was, an article about the International Olympic Committee, and signing an agreement with Pfizer and BioNTech to inoculate all the athletes who are going to take part in the Olympics. So it looks like probably the burden will not fall, on Japan in this sense, but on the International Olympic Committee. So, and it sounds like the athletes will be inoculated before they come to Japan. So of course, it's, the details of the deal have not been disclosed yet, but well, hopefully, there will be some, let's say, some certainty and feeling of safety, at least, when we know that the athletes are vaccinated.
Okay, so thanks for that comment, Maya. The burden for having the athletes inoculated has never been Japan. The burden on being inoculated, because first of all, depending on which vaccine you're getting, there's the first shot and then the second shot. Sometimes there's just one shot, but that needs to occur way before you come to Japan. The problem is once you come to Japan at the port of entry, how did they determine that you have been inoculated? That's the issue. And The other thing too is, you know, if you're an international traveler, you're coming to Japan, you land at Narita, you're supposed to ride a taxi that is certified for taking somebody from whatever country. You're not supposed to take public transportation, and you're supposed to help isolate for 2 weeks. That rule has been relaxed for the athletes. So as soon as they come in, they're free to go. They can begin their training. They can do what they need to do. They don't need to be isolated for 2 weeks. A lot of different things are. And yes, it's going to be a huge administrative burden, and because it's not just the athletes, it's also their families and the trainers and things like that. And it's less than 3 months away.
Any other questions or comments anybody would like to make?
Okay, let's move on. This is kind of one of the beefier parts of what is going on in Japanese politics that's important to you, and that is the current standing of Prime Minister Suga. How is his position with regard to, you know, the rest of the cabinet, with regard to his popularity among voters, potential voters in an election? Who is second or third coming up? So the reason why this is important is because, you know, who is prime minister at any one time dictates a lot of policy situations. So the prime minister has hung his hat on the digital agency, on the COVID response, on the United States relationship with what's going on with China and Korea, particularly South Korea, as a partner against what could potentially be happening with North Korea. So there are progress being made in all of those points that I've talked about. But that can change on a dime with the change of the prime minister, or if the prime minister feels like somebody is breathing down his back, he might take a more cautious or a more aggressive approach on certain issues, and that's happening right now. First of all, you will remember that he took over the reins from Mr. Abe, and Mr. Abe resigned as a result of being ill or sick or something like that. And he pretty much disappeared from view until just recently. And maybe 2-3 weeks ago, it was reported that he came out as the czar for the revision of the Constitution. And the first component of this Constitution is a revision of the referendum law that is currently in place, that allows for a constitutional challenge because it requires not just a vote within the Diet, it also involves the Japanese people voting as well to change the Constitution. So it requires 2/3 of both houses, plus a referendum that is voted on, and a majority of people who vote on it saying yes or no pretty much dictates how the bill will go. So Mr. Abe came out of the shadows. He self-appointed himself as the leader of this group. This group has been going on for a long time. And as you know, reforming the Constitution has been one of the main goals of Mr. Abe ever since he was a politician, because it was one of the things that his grandfather wanted to do too. So he feels it is something of his destiny. That bill for the referendum went into the chambers. It went out of committee and went into the chambers. It will be voted on this next week, and all reports are that it will go through. So this is something that the LDP has been attempting to do. They would hold committee meetings and nobody would show up. Just the LDP would show up. So this went on for month after month after month. The opposition parties were opposed it to such a degree they didn't even send anybody to discuss it. Well, the initiative has a renewed vigor, and I think the reason why is because the former prime minister, it's something he can devote his full time to. And since it's important to him, that's exactly what he's done. And he has been successful. He received the concurrence of the main opposition party to let it slide last week, and then it left committee and will go into the House for consideration. So you can pretty much predict that this referendum bill will be passed. It's one of the first steps. There are a couple of other steps required in reforming the Constitution. But if you put this in context, let's say that the Prime Minister, he pushed on that ever since he was Prime Minister, Mr. Abe. He was unsuccessful. He resigned. He devoted himself to it. Mr. Suga's standing is not so great as interim Prime Minister, so you change the law when you can, and then you come back as Prime Minister. That is a likely scenario that is being developed right now. We have a little time before the tea leaves kind of tell us what's happening for the election of Prime Minister and how Mr. Suga does in the election of the lower house. Almost certainly, he's not going to let the constitutional mandate of October 21st force him to have the election on that date. He's going to use his power of calling the election to his advantage, even if it's a small advantage. That's what's going to happen. With the by-elections that we had 2 weeks ago, you remember that the LDP did very poorly, and now that has caused infighting within the LDP on who's going to be the top dog, who's going to be the favorite son, who's going to be appointed powers to be a candidate. It just was reported, I believe, yesterday that Nota Keiko has achieved the 20 votes that allow her to be a candidate to become Prime Minister. So it's not a signal that she's going to become a candidate, but it's a qualifying move that was achieved. And so it looks like the forces are now beginning to line up. The number one person that people like to talk about, especially the foreigners, because he's an appealing personality to the foreigners, that's not necessarily reflected among the Japanese population, but that's horrible. And he is a potential candidate. He's actually the most popular candidate when candidates are talked about. But the only way he could run as a candidate for Prime Minister is if he either leaves, he resigns from his ministerial position, and he would have to resign from the cabinet, and then he could challenge the Prime Minister. Or the more likely scenario is that Mr. Suga decides he's not going to run. If Mr. Suga doesn't decide to run, then it opens the door for other candidates coming in. And the fact that Noda has suggested that she's going to be a candidate kind of gives life to that scenario. On the contrary, Mr. Abe is snuggling up to Mr. Suga and saying, look, I want to push through this referendum for the Constitution. I know you don't like it because it's kind of unpopular among the Japanese population, but it's important to me. So if you help me do this, then maybe you can be Prime Minister. I think Mr. Abe could make that call independently on his own accord. He has that much power. He's the titular head of the largest LDP faction, and if he wants to become Prime Minister, he would definitely be a candidate for Prime Minister. Whether he'd be elected or not is another issue, and that depends on what happens between now and then. If Mr. Suga just continues to falter and not really show any charisma or leadership or do anything that's of great significance, we don't even know with the digital agency if he's going to be successful with that either. So the room is open, and there's beginning to be tectonic movement that people should watch, because it could be that we have another couple of years with Mr. Abe as Prime Minister, or with Mr. Suga as continuing to be Prime Minister and Mr. Abe in the background. So a lot going on there. I hope it's not too much, and I hope it makes a certain amount of sense. But probably with questions, more will be revealed.
Timothy, are you open for questions now?
Yes.
So I'm very curious. In all the years I've watched Japanese politics, I've watched the minister position kind of drift in and out, and only really two long-standing politicians who stayed at that top seat. This time, the shenanigans were really surprising. Oh, I'm sick. I got to pull out. And instead of having elections, you know, pick one of these guys. There you go. You're going to be prime minister. You didn't pick them, but you know, hey.
That decision was 24 hours. You're absolutely right.
And so it looked like it happened in 24 hours. It seems to me that was all built. They've planned this, put this in. He sits off in the background, plays with his, I mean, I'm not on the front seat, and let someone else take the front shot. All these all this stuff going on. Absolutely. I don't want to be there holding the bag and this goes. Put somebody else up in front. And then we'll get one of those other cool, smart people to come in after it, gauge the waters, and back in.
Yeah, that's always been a thought in the background, because on the one hand, Mr. Abe was visually ill in meetings leading up to around this time last year. He was, it was of general concern among his inner circle that he wasn't doing very well, and it is already registered that he does have a certain illness that he's been taking care of. It does make a lot of sense to find somebody to take the heat, because we can tell that the next 8 months are going to be just crap. That we've got COVID, we've got the Olympics, we got all this stuff going on. I don't want to be around, because it's just going to paint me in that same paintbrush that, I'm unsuccessful, I can't get things done. Let's give it to somebody else, get through this hard time, and just blame that individual for the successes we didn't, and then come in as a hero. That's a great strategy. It's a great scenario. I don't know if well, you can't say that people are not that sophisticated and haven't thought that far ahead. I think it's very likely that exactly is what has gone on.
I also wonder, until about maybe 2 or 3 months ago, there were speculations that Koike Yuriko-san might be, one of the candidates for, prime minister. At least, some people in the foreign community here were talking about this. And she has proved to be really a very skilled politician. So, of course, she's the governor of Tokyo now. So, in this sense, it's probably difficult for her, to move back to national politics. But what are the chances of her doing that? And what is the possible timeline in this?
Great. It's a great question. It comes up from time to time. From my own personal observation, I think it's unlikely. It's almost kind of ridiculous to think of that, but it is something to consider. So first of all, let me tell you why I think it's so ridiculous. First of all, she is the leader of a party that she created, Komin First, and she's the governor of Tokyo, the largest city in the world. She doesn't report to a cabinet as the prime minister reports to a cabinet, and she's not a factional leader like the prime minister is a factional leader of the LDP. So the prime minister needs to report to, and it's a prime minister's position. It's not a president's position. It's different from the power of a governor, which is somewhat like at the tip of a pyramid. The prime minister is more like a coach and a team leader. We're trying to craft the prime minister's position with more executive powers, like the way it stands right now. why would the governor give up so much power and authority and so little heat compared to what the prime minister has to deal with? I mean, she's a powerful person in her own right. But yes, you're right. Sometimes there are not megalomaniacs, but there are people who feel like they have a destiny and they want to serve that destiny, and damn the torpedoes, and this is what I'm going to do with my life. It is possible. The other thing is that you would never know that. You would never hear anything from her lips, because first of all, we have the Tokyo elections coming up in the elections on July 4th. So 2 weeks before that, the election campaign starts. So of course, she wants to promote her candidates, the people who are in her team. She wants to promote Coming First as the party of choice, as opposed to, for example, the NATO politicians in the city government or the LDP in the city government. She wants to develop that base. So it is possible if she came out as just wildly successful in the Tokyo elections. There is a span of time between that, then the Olympics, then the elections. She could, first of all, run for a seat. So she can't just become prime minister by default. So she has to run for a seat in the lower house, get that seat, and then, I mean, how could she become prime minister in such a short span of time? She would have to spend some amount of time, some sort of preparation. I just don't think it's logistically possible for her to come in and be a successful prime ministerial candidate with everything else that's going on. It just takes too much time and planning. And I think it's right that maybe people in Tokyo would say, you've betrayed us because of all these campaign promises and everything, and now you've left us to go for national politics. And who the hell are you? I think probably might be a very good move. And what's there to benefit? She's already the queen of the largest city in the world. I think that's pretty cool in and of itself. But it could be interesting.
Thank you. Well, I do encourage everybody who is listening to come up on stage and ask questions or share your opinions or make comments. Please don't hesitate. Let us know about that.
And I'll just say that I've known Timothy for quite some time. He was introduced to me many, many years ago at the ACCJ function. And since that time, I've been able to really engage with some of the great thoughts. He's deep in a lot of things Japan that other people kind of gloss over. And so the knowledge, the expertise, the background you're getting here, chatting with Tim is amazing. If you haven't checked out his YouTube channel, please go there. I really appreciate you coming up on stage. Your thoughts are part of this process. This is not a radio station.
Thank you, Dylan. I think of all of the things that we talked about today, one of the most important, one of the things that you need to focus on is this referendum law, although it's minor in terms of the other things that we've talked about, the geopolitics and that sort of thing. But the referendum law, it's a bellwether. It is a signal of things to come. And so if you haven't been that interested or you weren't watching it very carefully, of all of the things we've talked about, I think this is the one that you need to just keep a special eye peeled for. There will be movement this next week. And so follow that, and then follow what happens as a consequence of that. Probably there will be some overflow between now and the next time we talk next Sunday. So just keep a keen eye out for it. The other things are, digital law will be passed because the goal of delaying it has been achieved. And I think those two issues are the ones that will be really active this next week.
I also would like to ask about any developments with regards to the children agency. So how is that going on?
Great. That's a great question. So you might remember that the Japanese government it consists of the Prime Minister's office that they try and make into the executive office. That's why the office of the Prime Minister has grown so enormously since the Koizumi administration. So that's one area of one arm of government. So in the United States, they say there are 3 areas of government, maybe 4 areas of government if you include the prince, right? But in Japan and in the United States, one of those arms of government is the court and the Supreme Court. Here in Japan, the Supreme Court plays almost a negligible role. But there's the office of the Prime Minister, then there's the upper house and the lower house, and then the various ministries. So most bills come out of government through the ministries. The ministry that has the umbrella over whatever that issue is, if it's raising taxes or extending something for a certain area of the population, or for trade, or for immigration, it falls into different ministerial topics. And most bills come out of that. There are rare instances when the politicians, or more importantly, the factions, come up with their own bill. And the remarkable thing is that the most controversial bills come out of the faction or the political parties rather than through the bureaucracy. So the most recent example that you might remember clearly is the gambling legislation. That didn't come out of any one of the ministries. That came out of a certain faction within the LDP. So this whole bill of let's allow for gambling in Japan, and this is how we should do it. And they got together with the various ministries, and they put that bill together. The same thing is true with the digital agency. The digital agency came out of the Prime Minister's office and was motored by the LDP. The third and the fourth one are the Ministry of Caring, which is a ministry that is set to be launched on focusing on the suicide pandemic, or the suicide, it's not a pandemic, but suicide scenario here in Japan. It's just really so large. And so they've devoted an agency to taking care of, depression and, death by overwork and things like that. So they've created a new agency. The Children's Agency is another one that has come out of the LDP, and it has been criticized by the opposition because it is an election ploy. We know that we're going into an election season, and all you old farts that are in the LDP, you want to dust off yourself, and you want to appear to be caring and generous and kind old granddaddies that people are going to love. And so you came up with this cockamamie idea of let's focus on the youth of the country. And it is unclear if, in fact, that will actually take hold and be launched to deal with the children, but as a conversation and as something you put your back behind. There's no way that it is even going to come up to serious diet consideration for another year. But they're talking about it now, and it is being criticized as just an election ploy. So it is getting a lot of press. I don't know if it's getting a lot of action within the various bureaucracies. The Ministry of Caring for Suicide Prevention is getting a lot of traction. It has been put through the diet as an agency to be launched, so it is getting money. The digital agency similarly is in the same situation, but the children's agency is far from being actually established because there's just not enough traction there. I think the criticism is probably well placed that it is an election ploy. Who knows if it'll go forward?
Thank you. Fumi? Please.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Tim. Good morning. Yeah, I'm just been hearing what you guys are saying, and I've got a question about Prime Minister's election. So if Suga hasn't decided to not to sort of stand in the Prime Minister election for the next one, I think Shida, Ishiba, and Ono and Noda will stand. And if the vaccination system has been constructed very well and successful, and this digital thing, digital, department has been successfully established, I think Mr. Kono is likely to win in the Prime Minister election. So if he became if Mr. Kono became a Prime Minister of Japan, are we going to be more? Is he going to be lead the country more right hand or right wing or left wing? Because I've been seeing he's just a little bit too, I don't know, a little bit too aggressive to other countries, Asian countries like China and Korea as well. So he might cause a little bit more friction between these countries, and be worrying about that. So if you can just answer that question, that would be fantastic. As a Japanese, I should have known that already, but I don't follow that the Japanese politics too, like you do. So yeah, just
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I wish I was having a cup of coffee out on the patio with you. I can hear the birds chirping away.
I'm in the mountains, so yeah.
First of all, let me just address your candidate lineup. You said, I think it's maybe Motaro or Kishida or Ishiba as the candidates. And I can address that one right away with a high degree of confidence. That of those three people, the only person who will be a candidate for prime minister of the three people that you talk about is Motaro. Kishida has no chance of being a candidate for prime minister, and Ishiba is gone. He's dead in the water. He might attempt to get a candidacy. He might, but I don't think so. And I don't think he will become prime minister. It's not in the cards. Motaro, on the other hand, does stand a good chance, and it's kind of like, to respond to your question, what kind of prime minister might he be? Is he left-leaning? Is he right-leaning? It's the same thing with Koizumi, the younger son of the Prime Minister Koizumi, very popular minister. So he is the Minister of the Environment now, way before his time, way before he deserves it. But he's got a certain amount of popularity. He is surrounded by a courtier of people who are developing him, not to make mistakes, not to make any kind of, don't get caught, drinking in Ginza during COVID restrictions. Don't do anything with ladies of the night. Don't do anything, right? So similar to him, that's the situation with Motaro. So Motaro, his dad is still very vibrant. His dad was Speaker of the House. His dad wants his son to become Prime Minister. I believe that Motaro will be Prime Minister. If he's not Prime Minister in this next round, he will be Prime Minister within the next two elections. So he's not going to reveal too much about his positions are, what his direction is. He's going to be because that's, you don't really bear the torch and get lots of voter support when you rabble rouse. And for him to rabble rouse, he's got a couple of issues. Nuclear being one of them that he's known for. He's also known as a bit of a maverick because he's not the true dyed in blue Japanese national. His father was prominent. He's a fourth generation politician. He was educated overseas. He speaks English fluently. So there's a little bit of reluctance there. So he's trying to mask that by being a little bit more, what's the word? Not normal, but a little bit more not noteworthy. he's going to do a great job. He's going to try and, make the vaccine rollout more successful than it has been. He's been fighting hard for that. And he's not going to challenge the prime minister unless the prime minister allows him to by either resigning or some sort of scenario resigning from his portfolio and running. It will be a wild ride. It's difficult to say right now, but you can pretty much guess that he would probably be a friend to the United States, which carries lots of other innuendo for being friendly to the United States, what that means as a potential prime minister. So it's kind of hard to tell which way that will go, but I would guess he would be a lot more right-leaning than left-leaning.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, I get that. We'll keep watching what it's going to do to decide, which party I'm going to vote for the next election. Thank you.
By the way, I'm going to smile like a great question, by the way. So it's interesting to watch the left versus right discussion anywhere in the world. We are all of us, and fairly right. When we say left wing, we're not even close to left as well. And our, I'm sorry, the name is just going for me, but that candidate is an amazingly smart, intelligent guy. And so left versus right, he's going to figure out the best thing to do. And he's always done that.
Which candidate are you talking about? Are you talking about Konotaro or are you talking about
Konotaro.
Yeah.
Konotaro, and when he is ready to run for prime minister, you'll see him starting to pop up in really visible locations. He is one of those guys who's, remember his second speech that he gave, he rammed it together. He's the one who comes the aegis ashore. If it's the right thing to do, that's what he goes after. And he's one of these, he thinks 20,000 light years are right at my head. If you can keep up with him, if you've ever been in the room with him, you observe how quickly he carries the situation, turns it to his advantage and runs with it. You know, when the really neat. If he's not there, like you said, he'll be in there soon.
I agree, and he's young. He's I think he's probably 58 or 59 years old. Of all of the potential candidates, he is one of the youngest, and he's got style. His dad was speaking. How's that a big deal? Georgetown graduate. He's got, this is his third ministerial portfolio, so he is qualified. The only thing he lacks is he hasn't had a party position in the LDP, which means that the rank and file and some of the younger members of the LDP, they gravitate more to the older people, the people who have real political clout. He hasn't had the time to develop that. But otherwise, I think he has a great position, a great platform, and I think he'll be prime minister.
Someday at all. He still has a bunch of people who, like you said, paid his dues yet. We're going to get back of the line.
Okay, that's true, but you can't forget that he's not the head of a faction, which is a detriment to him. But the faction that he belongs to is a pretty good faction. It's the number 2 faction, and it is led by Taro Kato, who is the Minister of Finance, the long-term Minister of Finance. I mean, he's the Minister of Finance longer than Mr. Abe was Prime Minister, and he was Prime Minister himself. And he is Deputy Prime Minister. So, of course, he's going to support Konotaro, and that is powerful. The Minister of Finance is the most powerful ministerial portfolio besides the Prime Minister. So,
I find some humor in that. When we had the most recent election, I was pretty sure it was me. I said, yes, you got all the right stuff. And then you look at the situation that's happening in Japan, and they put Suga in. I went, you know what? You put Dead Man Suga up on stage, let him take all the shots, and then wait until the waters are calmer. Yep. And now you can run it in with the white man and the shining horse. So well played is what I'm thinking here.
Yeah, great.
Oh, Mayuko, good morning, and thank you for coming.
Good morning, Maya, Timothy, everyone.
Good morning.
Thanks for having
Welcome
me.
back.
Thank you so much. I actually just joined like maybe 30 minutes ago, so this might have already been covered. And
We were
this
mostly talking about you, but go ahead.
And this is actually related to what you've been talking about just now about Honotaro. I just wanted to know, in your opinion, how likely is it that he actually becomes a prime minister before, let's say, 2030? Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, you could share that.
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed. Really? Wow. Okay. Interesting. And my second question, this might be a little bit off the topic, and if so, you don't have to answer it. But since you've been covering Japanese politics for so many years, I was just curious, what do you think is the biggest challenge for foreign journalists to cover Japanese politics, and how do you overcome it? So in other words, what is the secret tip, for foreign journalists to be successful?
Yeah. Are you a journalist?
No, but my husband is.
Okay.
But we're not based in Japan, so.
Okay.
Right.
The problem with, well, there are a couple of problems. Number one, Japan is not really a free press society. The freedom of press is very restricted. The Prime Minister's office basically is in control of the National Public Broadcasting Service, NHK. The Prime Minister appoints the leader of NHK, so that gives them considerable power to guide what is being talked about and what is being considered news. But also, the Keisha Club is a feature pretty unique to Japan. And in order to have access and to be considered as a potential person for questions, or also for background and that sort of thing, you have to be a part of the club. So, just as a bit of insight, I worked for a member many years ago, and I spent all of my time with him. It was a pretty intense job. Car would come by and pick me up at my residence at around 6 in the morning. Then I would go and pick him up. And sometimes we would go to breakfast briefings. We would go somewhere, end up in the office for a couple of hours every day, and go to dinners, and make a couple of speeches, and then I would take him home. And when I took him home, and this was every day, I mean, on weekends we typically traveled back to his election district, which was Osaka. But when I took him home and dropped him off at his residence, there was always 5 or 6 correspondents waiting for him. One of them had already been let in upstairs by his housekeeping. And they would be there and very casually drinking, smoking, not raucous, not girls involved or anything like that, but probably having some food and drinks and just chit-chatting, talking about all sorts of scallywank and rumors and that sort of thing. But that's how they get their insight. And these guys have developed these relationships over years, and they do favors for each other. And for the foreign correspondents to approach that, I mean, it is just a wall that is way too high. And the social fabric just doesn't allow for it. Even for foreign correspondents to come into the Keisha Club is that's a real challenge. So I think those are the two things that really prevent real information coming out. So what the foreign correspondents need to do is they need to have their ear much closer to the ground. There are very few shortcuts. I mean, being in the press club is a shortcut, but if you can't do that, then you need to have your ear very close to the ground, and that means reading Bunshun, reading Shukan Shincho, these rags that come out, because of all of the things that are produced, it's like panning for gold. Every once in a while, you're going to find something that's accurate, that's distinct, that's revealing, and you just need to parse through it. And that just assumes that you speak Japanese or you read Japanese in a high enough at a high enough level that you can you can get through that quickly instead of spending your entire day going through one bunshun on a Thursday afternoon. Response to your question.
Yeah, very interesting. How is FCC? You have FCC in Japan, right? Foreign Correspondence Club.
Yes, we did.
Gaikokujin Kisha Club, right?
Right.
Right. How is how effective is that organization?
Anybody can join the Foreign Correspondence Club. You don't need to be a correspondent to do that. The fees are relatively low, and the great benefit that you get is that, as they tell you when you're joining or when they're teaching you, is that you get to talk to correspondents.
Right.
So it doesn't reveal to you anything more, but you do get invited, or you get to know about the briefings that go on, and those are pretty important. They have a good library, they have a good restaurant, they have a very nice. Since they moved into the new offices, but it is still dominated by the former correspondents who came over many years ago. They're in the leadership. It was once criticized as just being an old boys network.
Right.
That is somewhat diminished, but there's still an awful lot of that's going on. A lot of the internal politics.
Right. Great. Very interesting. Thank you so much, Timothy.
Thank you, Mayako. Okay, Hayato, how about you? Welcome back.
Oh, hi, how are you? Okay, so just a couple comments and some questions, right? So one is this week, what kind of stood up for me and the news was WHO encouraging to hold the Olympics. Because
isn't that interesting?
WHO is an organization.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So because they should be holding for vacation, right? So
and you kind of want to say, who the hell are you guys?
What? Yeah. Why are you like because you should be, the other way around, not just to push this Olympics, Jesus Christ, right? So it was abnormal, but recently the WHO has been criticized for being under the Chinese influence, right? And as you know, the Chinese have the Winter Olympics coming in February of next year, right? Yeah, so if the Tokyo Olympics cancel, right here, what happens the next one in China? So for them, Chinese, and they kind of wanted to push this one, right, to help promote the Olympics, right? Because when we have Olympics in Tokyo, then there's the people come and say, oh, the next Olympics will be in China, right? So let's get together there again, right, in February, right? So that was kind of it's really like a abnormal move, right? That was never expected, right? So then again, another question was, so at this stage, those the discussion of a constitutional revision kind of came up again, because as you know, this has been going on for a very long time, right? And it was kind of got quite down for a while. And suddenly out of blue, here's one, same discussion again. So basically, under the Japanese constitution, Japan is not allowed to hold a military force. So the current the Japanese defense force, it's a position as more like a part of the police force, right? And not the military. But the proposed, constitutional revision is going to change, remove that restriction. That was, the Article 9 of the Japanese, constitution, right? So then I'm wondering, something is right? Because as you know, everything is kind of correlated in one way or another, right? There's no incident here. There's no accident. So, and there's only one way for sure that we get this constitution being revised for sure, 100%, which is that if we're going to have a war with China, and we want to revise it, right? Everybody's going to vote. I'm kind of wondering if that maybe that's the motivation behind for this question to suddenly come up recently in the last 2-3 weeks, right? And also, like in terms of the politics, Mr. Abe has, expressed publicly that he's going to support Mr. Suga, but at the same time, he started doing his own fundraise to become, to get himself elected as a third-time prime minister 3 weeks ago. Right? That's still going on. So obviously, what he says is not what he may be planning to do. So like Timothy has advised earlier, so he's kind of gauging to see what's going on, right? To see whether it's the right opportunity for him to kind of jump in to become prime minister, or he will stay behind and get everybody else take the heat, like the Suga or even the Corner Tower, right? Yeah. So I think that's kind of going on. So if he thinks it's a right opportunity, and he's just going to run for the third time prime minister, and he may be like a very long time prime minister for a while again. Yeah, and in terms of health issue, he kind of resigned from health issues. He had Crohn's disease, for a long time. But as far as I know, he has no problem now with the health. So because he's already reported, having the party every night and having a big dinner in a French restaurant. Yeah, so for that, and it was like one movie angle that was kind of very interesting was Mr. Nikai, right? Because as you know, the Mr. Suga kind of surprised for this the front runner. He got through the Mr. Kishida. He went over the corner Kishida Ikuba, right? Three front runner to become prime minister of the country. And the only reason he became the prime minister was because of backing by this Mr. Nikai. Now the Mr. Nikai is getting very old, and he's known to have a dementia. But he kind of wants to establish, his son or his successor, his power, while he's still well. So that's another big play, he's being played, I think, we don't know what's going to happen. But for sure, those things are all interconnected, interrelated. I'm done talking. Thank you.
Great observation, Hayato. Thank you very much. And although, frequently you come up with things and you kind of jokingly say, I hope this isn't interpreted as a conspiracy theory, but Japanese politics being what it is, it benefits you to think this way because there's a lot that's not obvious. There's a lot that's going on in the background, and these kind of conversations that we have are so important in just kind of deciphering what is going on, and hopefully we're closer to the truth than not. But being 100% is just not possible. So it's just trying to figure out what's going on and plan accordingly. But great insight, and you haven't said anything that I disagree with. Thanks, Hayato, for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And Sam, thank you. Well, thank you for coming and good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Great room as usual. I haven't been able to join for a couple of weeks, so good to see you guys virtually.
You get the merits.
I'll move down a rank in the hierarchy here. So I just have a quick question. You mentioned earlier about the Olympics and the athletes coming into the country, and how do you establish the sort of proof of having a big issue that's kind of a global thing. But I'm just wondering if there has been any kind of scuttlebutt or any kind of initially convincing kind of grumblings in the Japanese side about how they're kind of going to do that, or if they're going to roll out some kind of vaccine passport system or anything like that.
So since I do public policy as a business, it's what I do for a living. I'm frequently asked, so are bureaucrats more open to receiving proposals or offers to contribute to whatever the issues might be than they were in the past? And the answer there is absolutely. You get a wider reception when you're going to the various ministries on behalf of foreign producers or technicians or companies to introduce or to offer some sort of new technology. And a lot of this new technology that is needed is coming in from the foreign countries, especially on the digital end. So recently, the Taro has announced the intention for a vaccine passport, which is receiving the endorsement. So I'm not involved in that, but apparently that is not a homegrown kind of technology that they're rolling out is coming up too quick on the shoot to have been just developed unilaterally by Japan. What they plan to do is have a vaccine passport, and that will probably receive a good deal of acceptance among the Japanese. And there are two reasons for it. Number one, tourism is a huge boost to the economy that Japan has suffered from since this pandemic started. So they want to get that engineered again. So the way that they would do that, it's twofold actually. First of all, is Japanese going overseas, traveling on business or traveling on tourism. So that's something the Japanese can create and monitor and distribute among the Japanese. The second component of that are the foreigners that are coming into Japan. So every country is going to have its own kind of system. You know, how do you unitize that? How do you verify that? But at least as far as the Japanese are concerned, the idea is to have a vaccine passport, and the athletes that are coming in have to submit for their own kind of vaccine passport that will be on an iPhone. So it will be an iPhone application. And the interesting thing is that although you have a vaccine passport, it doesn't mean that you can't come into the country if you're an athlete or a trainer or a family member without being inoculated. You can still come in without inoculation just as long as you have verification of non-infection. So there'll be a couple of stages for that too, but apparently that will all be digital. It'll all be monitored by the cell phone. And by the time the Olympics come on, I think you will see this in full-fledged rollout and be closely followed by passports for travelers going out of Japan. And using the experience of the Olympics as a kind of a test bed, I think between the end of the Olympics and probably September, October, when the pandemic begins to cease to be such a huge issue, not just in Japan, but globally, that more and more people will be traveling, and the doors will open, and all of a sudden we'll be heading towards that roaring 20s that I've predicted that's going to be on the cusp of a world without COVID. Thank you.
Could I just ask one more question, if that's okay?
Sure.
Thank you. So you said that it's definite that Kono will become the prime minister by, let's say, 2030. So does that mean that, you know, we will not see the end of LDP dominance? Like no chance for other parties to rise up? Is that what it is?
No, but you've given me till 2030.
Right.
That's 9 years.
Is it long?
That's in Japanese politics. That's a long time.
I see.
So the most likely scenario is that we fall back into a prime minister happening once every year or 2 years.
Right.
And there is a scenario, low likelihood but increasing in possibility, of the LDP losing the seat and not being able to provide the prime minister. I don't think that that's likely in this upcoming election. But you know, depending on a lot of different things, I mean, the LDP could lose miserably in the upcoming lower house elections, and with their coalition partner Komeito, it could be that they just don't have enough of a push. But you know, the Japanese population too has gone through that once before and suffered as a result. You know, the opposition coming in. The opposition is really starting to come together. They've learned a lot from the by-elections of 2 weeks ago. How they can promote each other's candidates and hold back on offering their candidate just for the sole goal of defeating the LDP. So it means a lot of horse trading. It means even though I have a viable candidate in this election district, we can hold off and support another party's candidate just so that we can take the LDP out. Once we take the LDP out, then we can have our own internal fights and figure out how we market, Japanese politics. It's a scenario, and I think that even becomes. I mean, you just have to sign on every week to apologize. You have to be here every week, because every week it happens that something critical happens almost every week. But it's an interesting thing to watch and to dwell upon. But yeah, it's hard to say right now. But if you've given me 9 years, definitely, if Konotaro keeps his nose clean, he's young, he's vibrant. If he doesn't get it, and typically speaking, for those people who run as a candidate once or twice, they generally get it the third time.
Right.
I mean, even people who have been losers have come up again. I don't think the two losers that we talked about earlier are never going to be prime minister candidates, but you'll see new ones come up, like Noda Seiko, who would probably come up as a candidate, knowing that she would lose, but just because she wanted to have her name out there, so it's in the public.
Right.
Fantastic. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you
Really
very much.
interesting.
Yes,
Thank
if I may, make a comment. It looks to me that, as Timothy said, the Japanese nation was, had that experience after, it was just before the Great East Japan earthquake, when they actually put the opposition party in power. But since then, it seems to me that the opposition has not been able to bring up really strong, viable candidates. So the opposition always relies on, coalitions, and we don't have really names of politicians that stand out, like, the politicians of LDP. Of course, it could be something like, a vicious circle, because those politicians, the opposition party has not had the chance to actually rule the country for, what is it, 10 years now? No, maybe 9 years. But still, they still need to actually, let's say, nurture strong candidates, so that we can say that their coming into power is something which is not just possible, but probable in the near future. I don't know what Timothy's take on this is, but that's how I feel about the opposition parties and the LDP at the moment.
If I can just throw in my 2 cents. So the way politics works here, it's not so much the candidate, it's the leaders of the parties or the factions. It's determined by their leadership. And we do have, the opposition has great leaders. Edano is really, he's on a roll. He's really pushing the envelope. It's just that you don't want to always be seen as a naysayer, as a critic or something like that. So it's hard when you're out of power to rise too much in prominence, because mostly what you're saying is they're doing it wrong. They should do it the other way, and people get sick of that. What you need is an issue. Something happens. The North Koreans start firing more rockets, or the pandemic spirals out of control, and if you have an issue that the individual or the leader gets behind and can kind of succinctly describe to the population that is different from what the LDP position is, which is sometimes easy, because almost always the LDP goes for the money way, the money solution, slow to react, and there's always the suspicion that it's big corporations that are getting the windfall of this, and then the Japanese population suffers as a result. So the opposition, especially Komeito and the Constitutional Democratic Party, are in a good position. They just need sort of an issue to come up. The candidates that might run for a political seat in a district under the banner of one of these opposition parties has less to do with it is also their personality that drives it, as compared to who the opposition or who else is running. But it also really depends on the leader of that political party that they're running under. Do they come to their political speeches? Do they endorse them? Are they sometimes on TV? The power of the mass media here in Japan is so much stronger than it is in other countries. So being on TV and being on an election vehicle with the leader of the political party carries enormous weight.
Thank you for that. Hayato, please go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to add a couple more. Right. So regarding this Mr. Kono, I guess it is a future to largely depend on the move by the Mr. Abe from here, right? Yeah, because like I had this discussion with this head of the government affairs SoftBank 2 weeks ago. So if Abe comes back again, right, like third time prime minister, and he'll become really like king of Japan. He'll be there for a long time, we believe. So then that kind of is going to delay Mr. Kono's opportunity to become the prime minister. So that's one. Right? And also like you're right, because then if there's a war, right, like with China or North Korea, whatever, and most likely Mr. Abe is going to be there, right? Then he'll be there for like 10 years, 5 or 10 years. So he's the older than Mr. Kono, but still like young enough to be there for a while. So that's one. Another one is this Mayuko's question of the FCC, Foreign Correspondents Club. That was I believe it's very powerful. Right? The former branch manager of the CIA was head of the FCC before. Yeah, so it is a very powerful organization. Now, I don't know how much benefit the Mayuko's husband can get from it. That's another question. And lastly, the Seiko Noda, right, who has run for the prime minister a couple of times, I believe that she can make a good noise, but she'll never become a prime minister only because she's the wife of the mob. Everybody knows her. Yeah, so she's going to get the 20 vote here, 30 vote here, and that's as far as she can go.
Yep.
That's my take. Right.
Okay. Let me address your first point. The other points are kind of up to a lot of debate and interpretation. But the first one, yes, if Mr. Abe comes in, I think it doesn't diminish Kono Taro. It actually elevates him, because what is Mr. Abe going to do with Kono Taro in order to enhance his likability or enhance his potential to be prime minister? He's going to ride on Kono Taro. So probably Kono Taro, since he doesn't have the LDP party position under his belt, probably, he'd be chief cabinet secretary. He's already been foreign minister. He's already been defense minister. Probably chief cabinet secretary. And given that, the next time that there is a change in leadership, it's definitely, it enhances his possibilities so much better, especially with chief cabinet secretary under his belt. So under any scenario, addressing Mayuko's question, what's the likelihood? It just gets better and better for Kono Taro, in my view.
Yeah, and I agree. Japan's politics is becoming a family business. So from one family to another, right? Yeah. Abe family, Kono family, right? And also, it's the same guys, same actors, and it's the family, and also Koizumi family.
25%.
Right.
Well, thank you very much for the commentary. And I would like to tell you that we're 30 minutes past the initially intended time to end the room. So, well, if you have questions, please let us know now. Or if you don't, then if there are no questions, we're going to close the room in about 5 minutes.
Also, may I just offer here that, we listen to what you guys have to say. And if you have ideas for us, we've taken 2 ideas that have come up from the room and made those real. So the first one was, you might recall that espionage and the kind of cloak and dagger type of things coming up. We talked about that, and rather than incorporate it into our room, we had a separate room. And that was very well received about 3-4 weeks ago. And then last week, Gary, who just signed up for on the speakers platform, I came up with the idea of talking about education and how education is a component of the overall thing that we're talking about, Japanese politics, Japanese society, how it's being managed and where it's potentially going. And so we had a second room on education just last week, which was really intriguing. It wasn't so well attended, but I think maybe we didn't proliferate it yet. But if you have ideas about that have a into Japanese politics or how society is going, please mention them. And if we have expertise in it, then we'll launch a room on it, or maybe even spend more time on it. So we have open ears. Hi, Gary.
Hello. I'll just ask a question to Timothy, if I may. Where can I go to learn about how the Japanese political system is set up? It seems like there's so many elections and there's different offices for different prefectures. I always get a little befuddled, which is my normal state of affairs. And I was hoping that you might be able to point a finger and put me in the direction of where I can learn about this, or maybe we could even talk about it here.
I get this question a lot, and because the answer is so unsatisfying, that's why I launched Tokyo on Fire, which was a video series that I did for 3.5 years, where I talked about Japanese politics or different components of, just like what we're talking about here on Clubhouse.
I missed that. I want more. Sorry.
Okay. So I have on my YouTube channel about 400 videos, different videos on different aspects that we delve into pretty deeply. I don't do that anymore. It was too time consuming and wasn't generating the kind of feed flow that I wanted. So I stopped that, and then Clubhouse came, and we're talking about the same issues on Clubhouse, and I hope it's insightful and rewarding for people who, take the time of waking up on Sunday mornings. But it isn't enough. And people ask me, Langley, how do you do it? How do you get all this information? How do you know all this stuff? And even for people like me who do this for a living and who are running the government affairs for their companies, the areas or the places you can go to get a feed on what's going on are so few and far between, or they're so difficult to access. So in my own particular case, there are about 25 politicians that I follow very carefully, that I have personal relationships with, that I've known for years and years. And they typically have a benkyokai that I attend. So you spend a nimaen to go to these benkyokais. Sometimes it's a breakfast, sometimes it's a dinner, sometimes it's just standing around and listening to a couple of speeches. It goes on for 2 hours. They used to have food. They don't do that anymore, but still these benkyokais are there. Of course, they're all in Japanese. They're all full of men in suits, very few women. But you got a feed there, and it's like not one of them is going to be able to do it for you. You need to go to 5 or 10 of them, and then you begin to get a rounder concept of actually what the issues are and what's going on. But that means that if you're not doing this for a living and have a reason to spend nimaen every time you do this with no rebound, you're not getting money out of it. You're just spending money. It's like a membership fee. It's hard for most people. The second way is that there are individuals who speak about Japanese politics on a regular basis. One of them is Dan Harada. He's been in Japanese politics. I've known him ever since I was working in the parliament myself. And he has a breakfast briefing once a month, and he talks about LDP. He focuses exclusively on LDP because he's an LDP member, and talks about the prime minister. And he's got great insight, very deep knowledge. But it's only a breakfast. It's only once a month, and you have to be invited by Dan. So if you don't know Dan, or if you don't live in Tokyo, you're out of luck.
I'd like to know how the political system is set up, because I know there's districts, and I know that there's representatives, and I know that there's a lower house and upper house. But how that works I would really love to see a flow chart on how that works.
Great.
Okay. If
That's a great question. Excuse me, just for jumping in. Initially, when we launched this room, the title of the room was Japanese Politics 101 to address exactly what you're talking about, Gary. That I thought people wanted to know more on the basics, how government is run, what are the components of it. And after our first room, the quality of the audience told us that we don't need to talk about that. People are more interested in what's going on internally. What are the dynamics? What is happening? What can we anticipate that's going to happen? How can we make sense of what I read in the newspapers? Sorry, Tomoko.
Well, Timothy, I'm sorry, and Tomoko-san, sorry to jump in. What I think we can do is have that chart, created and uploaded on the Japan Expert Insights, so that everybody who needs it, can go there and have a look, and then learn something about really the real basics. And then, of course, this room can continue in this way, because I believe that yes, visual materials are very important. For people to understand things just at a glance, and we cannot use any visuals here on Clubhouse, so probably we can work on creating an article and then probably a short series about how the political system and the political system is structured here in Japan.
one thing I can recommend you just go to the library or bookshop and buy the 社会の教科書 for the children. They teach you about the very basic about that gives you very good visuals, and it's great depending on how deep you want to go and how much history you want to go back. So it's really up to you though. But those the 教科書 for undergraduate, elementary, primary, or high school, junior high, or whichever, they will give you quite good, decent background to understand about grasping the situation.
Yeah. The other thing too, forgive me for the shameless plug, but the video series that I produced, if you go to YouTube and you type in Langley Esquire, that video library comes up, and it's more than 400 videos. And I had several series there. So one of the series was talking about doing business in Japan. What kind of issues are really important that you need to know? For example, what's the difference between a Japanese bengoshi and a lawyer? You think you need a lawyer, so you go hire a bengoshi. What is involved in that? These kinds of issues I've done lots of videos on, but there's also a video series on the various embassies in Japan, where they came from, and where how the land came into the country's possession, and what's the history of the diplomatic mission, that sort of thing. But there is another series there, and I think it's probably about 12 episodes, and it's called Japanese Politics 101. And it just talks about the things that you're talking about. So each session just captures one component, like the emperor. What is the emperor's role in Japanese politics? We did one video on that, and it went for 30 minutes, and it was deep and very interesting. What is the LDP? What is the tent that causes the LDP, and why? How has it been able to stay in power? Tomeko. What is Tomeko? Who are they? Where did they come from? And why are in bed with the LDP? So we went through that whole thing. It's probably a 12 series, but I think that we did that with the intention of laying the groundwork so that people who are somewhat interested, or maybe they're a diplomat and they're sent here and they didn't have enough time to beef up, maybe they could go to that library and get them up to speed as quickly as possible. But that might be an area that might be fruitful too.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay, thank you very much, really. And so I would like to proceed with closing the room now. We're into our second hour. So Again, thank you very much, everybody. We're looking forward to having you again next week. In the meantime, if you would like to hear about some other specific topics with regards to Japanese politics, you can email me, or you can email Timothy, or message us via LinkedIn, or directly via email if you have our emails. Some of you do, I believe, so that we can develop well the next rooms on these topics too. Thank you very much.